Nice to see you both, West Coasters. How are you?
Loving
Hanging
life,
in there.
yeah, loving life, but locked down completely. And I'm playing by the rules this go around for sure.
What does that mean that you're not walking your dog for people to yell at you when you're walking down the street in your neighborhood?
I am wearing my mask. Let's put it that way, and I'm out and about, but
Good.
I'm trying to be safe. That's all. It's scary. I don't know how Justin feels, but it's a challenging time. You know.
Definitely.
Yeah, I'm very fortunate that I live, we're just talking so close to the ocean and outdoors and all that kind of stuff. And the weather's nice and the sun is shining. I have one of my parents in Michigan. It was, snowing the last time I was there. So it's been good, but definitely challenging, definitely fully shut down. So yeah, I play by the rules. The only time I kind of take the mask off is when I go to the ocean. That's my space just to be. So
Awesome. Well, good to see you both. Thanks for coming on today. By way of introduction, Justin, since Herb is a regular with me, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and
sure,
what we're doing today?
sure. So I am the principal of Jefferson Broad, which is a company that consults across two different industries, both the real estate development industry as well as food and beverage, and that's kind of my two worlds. I've worked in real estate development, primarily developing mixed use, multifamily, um, mostly in urban areas. Now that's kind of extending for the past 10 years. And then about 4.5 years ago, started my journey in the food and beverage world with a company called Local, which was founded by two pretty well-known chefs, one in San Francisco and one here in Los Angeles, that a lot of folks know, named Roy Choi. And they had a really crazy and ambitious idea to reinvent fast food, and brought me out here and helped them run that company. And that was quite an experience. And since then have started working with other restaurants and restaurant groups. And Andy and I are currently working on a project together that is in Northwest Florida that kind of merges my two worlds. It'll be a kind of what we're going to discuss today, but a part of a huge development, kind of in a suburban area in Northwest Florida. So yeah, I get to do a lot of different things every day and
Awesome.
Do stuff like this and have the opportunity to work with you, and excited to have this conversation.
Good. As always, we have Herb. Tell us who you are, Herb, in case anyone doesn't know.
Thanks, Andy. Herb Heiserman, one of the managing principals over at Street Sense. Large presence on the East Coast in the Washington, D.C. market. But as you know, Andy, share with Justin, moved out here a couple of years ago to launch that effort here and bring our collaborative here. And I could spend the hour speaking of Street Sense because I'm very proud of it, but it's really an end-to-end solution provider of restaurant, retail, hospitality, a lot of food and beverage development work. As you know, we do everything from the concept development through branding and marketing, design, activation, all those things that you do and Justin does. And it's one of our sectors. We play in the multifamily as well and play in hospitality. It's all crashing together anyway. And I think that's one topic we can always talk about, but the worlds are coming together and it's all, life lives through food. James Beard had a great quote that, food is the common denominator or something like that. So, it's here to lend whatever I can to the conversation. So.
Awesome.
Awesome.
The impetus for today is really, this is a concept talk today. We've had a couple of episodes that are around the food hall business. We started out with one, I think we called it the food hall mess or something about how food halls have to evolve. And there were some very specific things. I wrote an article about it because I felt very strongly about it after working it and watching really through folks that had difficulty in watching the space in general, about my opinions on what those things that needed to evolve. And today we're talking a little bit further. I have been about a year ago, maybe Justin, I met Justin. He's working with a company, like he said, near Pensacola on a residential market. And they were looking for kind of a unique food service thing for it. They thought about maybe doing kind of a food truck park. And so we talked about what that meant. And then I presented a kind of a multi-concept venue that had a lot of food hall elements to it, and that there was a shared space. There was a few vendors there, and then we put a drive-through around the whole thing, and really worked hard on how to make it approachable in today's digital world, and that started me thinking a whole lot about how to do that and why to do that, and in other ways that what I call, do less better kind of concepts, how they can have opportunities to grow. And over the last many months, continuing to work on a number of projects that are so heavily based in off-premise, brings that up again. So the concept we're talking about, we haven't really named it. Justin and I have been calling the one that we developed, we called it the Yard.
Yep.
Because it was in kind of a residential community. I can let Justin talk about what that area is, but it's a large apartment kind of multi-use area. And the idea was to take, a pad site there, but I believe this same concept doesn't have to be in a pad site. It can also be mixed in a multi-use environment, where we put 4 concepts in. And like I said, we added a drive-through and made sure that it had kind of those features for today's world, with the ability to do curbside very quickly, and then as we worked on it, and then later really thought about it as a blending of also a food hall concept, a hip fast casual, a ghost kitchen, which guys calling me about here in a little while, and thinking about how this is working. So I've had a few calls and heard, you probably have as well, from developers that are kind of struggling with what to do with a lot of empty space that's now coming up. And unfortunately, due to the demise of some casual dining restaurants that are kind of being forced out of business to some extent, as well as retail. And so we came up with this concept that's about that, that gives restaurateurs who, I believe, and I've already been approached by a number of friends of mine that are, being put out of business or kind of looking for their next thing. The moment they're able, people are going to be jumping on opportunities. Like your client Roy, I'm sure he's probably trying to figure out what their next step's going to be, and where to put food service.
Yeah. I'll just I'll kind of bring it full circle from how you and I connected, Andy, in this and how I, kind of by some really awful circumstances, all this stuff has come to be, interesting. I think a lot of people in this industry, one of the things that, when I came on board, when I moved to Los Angeles and started working with Local, one of the things they had at their disposal was this really pent up demand for off-premise business. Mm-hmm. And one of our founders is, kind of known as the godfather of the modern food truck movement. So it made sense for the growth to occur outside of just our brick and mortar. Operating a brick and mortar restaurant is the most expensive thing you can do. And we were doing, relatively high quality, quick service food, paying people above market wages, locating in some areas that had never had full service restaurants before, or hadn't had them in quite some time. So we had a lot against this, and we, founders of that company knew this was a way to grow and to support their overall mission. And so when I came on board, kind of with no experience ever in food, just kind of built out an off-premise program, and it ended up being, highly successful. So I got to learn from kind of cultivating something from the ground up. And so when to this company, the Dawson Company, which was founded in Atlanta and now is based in Florida and is developing quite a bit in Pensacola. These guys are, I've known and worked with them for almost a decade, and they're brilliant when it comes to housing. But when it came to food service, they didn't know as much. And once Andy and I became connected, really where our point of interest came is that we both agreed that there are certain segments and areas of this business that allow someone to operate an actual business versus losing money, and that's what needs to be the focus of whatever we do. And I think, Andy, that's kind of, how you created the design that you did. First it was we needed a bar, and then it was we need to have a commissary kitchen, and then we looked at, the idea that you can with enough scale, you can have your own delivery service. And then he incorporated drive-through, which was brilliant. And then the whole thing was kind of an open air concept, which now is going to be at a premium, like having outdoor space, being able to, I think, Andy, with what you did, you could easily enclose something if it got cold enough. Pensacola doesn't really have that kind of climate, but, it naturally kind of acquiesced itself to what, this COVID or post-COVID world is probably going to look like. And, now that all this has happened, it's completely, it's kind of spot on with what someone needs. Just to add a little bit of additional color on that particular development, it's kind of in suburban Pensacola, and Pensacola is already a pretty small town. And why we're out there is because the largest credit union in the world, which is Navy Federal Credit Union, has the majority of their back office operations across the street, which is about 10,000 employees and about 2 million square feet of office space. I know you're between LA and DC, that probably seems like a foreign concept to you, but it's literally kind of out in the middle of nowhere. And it's this gorgeous, state-of-the-art campus. And, this is a company that doesn't fire employees. They're still hiring right now. They have moved some of their people off site, but it just made perfect sense for us to invest in this site. And one of the things we knew is like, hey, these guys have limited food options, and we need to find some way of not just serving our residents, but also making something that's attractive to our biggest neighbor across the street. And so that's what kind of drove the premise of connecting with Andy and looking at this project. And the primary focus of what they're doing is housing, and it'll end up being, somewhere between 700 and 600 housing units. But having something like this is really kind of invaluable. And, the last thing I'd say is, that I have a client, and this client is based in Atlanta, and they chose to open a restaurant in July, literally as things just started to kind of get open there. And, when they were raising capital for their restaurant, there was quite a bit of, there wasn't a lot of interest. It was just like, why would I want to invest in a restaurant right now? But one of the things that worked for them is I think that was the beginning of a really aggressive environment. Andy, you just spoke to this in terms of deals. And they got an excellent deal in an excellent neighborhood, and great terms. And they are exceeding expectations. I mean, they are probably overperforming by 30 or 40% of what their revenue projections were. And their model is very much focused in an outdoor environment. It's a barbecue restaurant, higher end, higher quality, 2 chefs that have been nominated for James Beard Awards. So, and they're about to open 2 other restaurants. And one of the things that I found fascinating is one is going to be in a food hall called Krog Street, which you guys are probably all familiar with in Atlanta. And Krog Street is adjacent to the Beltline. And the Beltline is kind of this, it was originally planned as like a multimodal, rail. It was, former rail that was around the city. And primarily it has been like kind of a walking and biking path that kind of takes you across several neighborhoods in the interior of the city. And literally they're set to open 3 more restaurants along different aspects of there. And I got to tell you, when you go there, you don't get a sense that there's a pandemic. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that it's kind of anchored by this outdoor space.
Yeah.
So one of the things I find fascinating is, as someone who's active in developing multifamily, one, you've never, for the first time, I think, in 15 years, you're seeing a shift away from urban back to suburban. I mean, there had been a migration for people in the cities for 15 to 20 years, and that's finally shifting. And we happen to have a project that kind of sits at that intersection. But the other thing is this outdoor space. And
Yeah.
I don't think you and I have ever had this conversation, but I thought about it when you were sharing what we were going to talk about. It's just seeing what's happening in a market like Atlanta that's a little bit more open than other markets, and places that are outdoor focused, like the Atlanta Beltline. You wouldn't know there was a pandemic going on. And I think a lot of the restaurateurs would probably speak to that. So it's been an interesting confluence of things. I'm excited to talk about this because I feel like, what you started with us, Andy, and what you're probably still working on is kind of the wave of the future.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing all that. Several things that you touched on, and Herb, want to get your thoughts on this. Some of the assumptions that I've been working with are coming from folks like Justin and a couple of other folks about what should we assume is going to be, short term and even more long term, about as far as how do we look at this, take the opportunity of what's happening, and because we have to get on with our lives, obviously, and build businesses that work. As you just mentioned, Justin, that kind of the shift of the workforce has provided a lot of opportunity for real estate, as well as locations where daytime population, a year ago would have said, probably maybe not put a restaurant there. But now, with so much daytime population shifted, around living areas, that provides a lot of opportunities. So we've got a confluence of a couple of good things out of this. There's available real estate. There's more people working out at home, and that's going to continue. Herb, I don't know, you tell me if you've heard this, but I hear just endlessly about how these people that own an awful lot of office space, they're starting, maybe you've had some people come to you starting to try to think, should we convert half of this office building into residential space?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of that going on. I've got a lot of different things crashing through my brain. One thing I want to grab hold on to is when you talk about the repositioning of this real estate and the understanding of the vacant real estate coming about, is that ownership landlord, what we'll call the investor, needs to reset their pro forma, needs to reset their understanding of what their real estate is worth. And that some people have been quick to that and others will never get there. And what I mean by that, the reality is those F&B food and beverage outlets really need to be looked at as an amenity to the community, amenity to the property, and not a large driver to the bottom line of pro forma. Because if we're trying to get our money as a landlord, let's say I own that mixed use property, out of my retail sector down at the ground floor, and I'm jacking my rent, they're never going to be successful. I mean, these are low margin businesses. This is tough business. And what I need to really do is roll that into my rent roll above, and understanding that if I have some great food and beverage, local chefs, local, opportunity, entertainment there, then I need to understand that that's a value add to the community and value add to the building above, and be realistic about my rents, my CAM, all that kind of stuff, those technical things. Because you got to be a partner in that business. And I'm seeing a lot of these businesses going to percentage rents. I can bring up all this data about, how we are literally as a country over retailed by 3 times the amount of space that we need, 3 times the second largest industrial country in the world. So we have 6.4 square feet per person. The next, places in Europe have 2.8. So, I mean, we have so much space. It's incredible. And as you say, I want to shift that into, yes, your population is shifting in where they're going to be spending their time. We have 180 people on staff. I have 180 offices right now. It's and frankly, as I understand the office community and through a partnership with CBRE, that's slow to come back. And you have really 20% occupancy right now in the office buildings, and that's just killing. If you take a downtown environment, I mean, that's just destroying any food and beverage, or entertainment or anything that's in that area. So when I said before, I think it's called Bee Cave, Texas, which is outside of Dallas, I would never do a collaboration of food, consulting there and so forth. I might take back that statement I made a year ago, because maybe that is a place that more daytime pop is going to be. Maybe that's a bad example. I don't know. But I think that, your core customer is shifting where it's going to be spending a lot of its day. So
you said a couple of very interesting things. One was you were talking about, the amenity aspect. And as you know, I was involved with a group that's what, and I think that the owner of the company I was working with that was looking for food hall space, that was the argument. And I thought he was 100% correct, telling landlords that here's our business model. Here's what we can afford to pay based on the model. And it needs to make sense you're going to be able to raise your rents, in the entire area for it. We're a big amenity. It needs to make sense, which was perfectly correct. And now, of course, this reset, is going to cause that to take place in those, urban environments where they're going to continue to struggle. And then you mentioned Bee Cave, which is funny because that was one of the locations that we were looking at for kind of a suburban thing that at the time it was kind of like, wow, maybe that's not really a place that this makes sense. They had actually gone to the extent of, almost designing a whole building to do kind of a food hall. And the whole thing was one, and it was going to be pretty expensive to do. And the worry was, hey, there's not enough daytime population here to support this, which there probably wouldn't have been. Now in that area, which is a really hot, hip part of Austin, there's a cajillion homes all around there, and everyone's at home working, so they need places to eat and be entertained. So all of a sudden, that becomes a viable option.
Yeah, and I want to shift into something else that was shared to what Justin was saying, and you all are working on. It sounds like an emerging market or a suburban market.
Yeah,
we are on our third, what we're calling Boxy Park, where we're literally, it was intended to be a temporary setup of, different culinary collection, and they were done out of box. People are all craze. It's an old craze now about the container, the shipment container.
We almost did that too. Andy talked us out of it.
I talked him out of trying to build in a steel box from some shipping company with a 6-foot ceiling.
We found out that the infrastructure you got to put in is almost as expensive as building sticks and bricks.
Does that sound familiar? Does that sound familiar, Justin?
It sounds like you guys had a conversation right before this.
No, him and I've never talked about this. So, I'm feeling vindicated at the moment.
You certainly are.
The point is, we did one in Lake Nona for Tavistock for an emerging area, an area they were going to build a lot of residential and build a neighborhood community around. And it was supposed to be temporary to draw people to that community. What happened is it ended up being such a success that they said, hell, we got to keep this. We got to rebuild it, and we got to shift it to often where we want the town center to be. But I mean, this is really something that draws community. And I go back to that statement, food and beverage is the common denominator to where we all come together. It's the kitchen table. So, be it Lake Nona, be it, BK, whatever. If there are emerging markets, we're doing one right now in Mission Viejo for somebody that's going to build 2,000 homes out there. But how do I draw attraction to this neighborhood now? I mean, it's mountain and farmland right now. So how do I get energy in there? And I think it's a perfect model because there's demand, and there's going to be increased demand over time. So I think there's a business model that works there in the emerging market.
One of the things that Andy put that we agreed on, but he was really emphatic about, and I mean will happen, is I think when you start to talk about things like percentage rent and that line between landlord and tenant starting to blur a little bit, that what ultimately happens is that it's going to be, I think it's going to become really difficult to be a pure landlord in these kind of opportunities. You're going to have to create way more value than that. And I can't recall the person's name that was on the last food hall conversation with you, but I was listening to him, and he's operating multiple food halls, and I heard him talk about this subscription model, and that was one of the things he was going to do as a way of, trying to help his tenants. And for me, all I thought is like, I thought to our conversations, Andy, about, the leadership that you provide as an operator with your partners that are also operators, and how important it's going to be to really, for there not to be a distinct line there. I mean, you really advocating on behalf of the people that you have there, and you're creating something, I think this reflected in your design, that's going to make your restaurateurs money. And Herb, to your point about, landlords, the first thing I think to myself is like, I mean, you're absolutely right. And, you consider a place like where we are in Pensacola, California's a little bit different of a market, but in markets where you don't have it may cost a similar amount to build, say what Andy's proposed for us, or we worked on, but the rents are half of what they are in Viejo. You have to figure out a way to make it work, and the way you make it work is you actually build something that's profitable for you and for the people, for your restaurateurs. So that's the other thing I think that gets lost is like, I don't know. It seems like, quite a few food halls sometimes were able to rest on their laurels because they have that kind of traffic. But now that you have to get creative, those folks you said, Andy, that are now out of business, that are going to look for deals, I can't imagine they're going to want to go to a place that's not going to, provide them multiple opportunities and ways of creating streams of income and revenue. That's just here to stay. That's one of the things I really think gets lost is like how as an operator, as an owner of a food hall, what are you doing, on behalf of your tenants or the restaurateurs in your space? It's just that there's a real premium there, and I think that it justifies a percentage rent on both sides. And it's not something that's discussed a lot. And as somebody who's working with a developer, it's hard. It's a hard pill to swallow because their focus is building apartments. They don't want to be involved in a food business. So the question is, how do they make this work for themselves where they're not ingratiated in a business that's outside of their core competency, and at the same time know that's the only way it's going to work. So.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a second, Justin, because I wanted Herb to hear this. So I thought it was very interesting because you had, the Dawson company there with their very large residential project. They recognized that they wanted an or not a static food environment. They knew that if we could build some tenant space and try to rent it to some fast casual operators or even a full service concept, which was crazy, but somebody like a sports bar or something in the South that's still unbelievably getting franchisees to build locations. They were thinking about that, and then one of the founders had seen, kind of a container park, food truck kind of park in Colorado, and he was asking me about it, and that's kind of where the conversation started. But I know it was a difficult, as you said, Justin, a difficult pill for them to swallow when I, kind of said, okay, here's what that means. You can't just build the place, rent it to them, and hope it works because it won't. And I think that has, when I've told a number of people over that over the last couple of years, some of them just think I'm wrong. You're wrong. Of course, there's good operators out there that can do that. But you can't point me to any, other than individual operators here or there. So when you're trying to create something unique like that, you're going to have to be more involved in it, or at least have the sense to have a concept built around a way that you can add oversight to it. And that's kind of the difference that Justin and I have been talking about is, okay, you need oversight, whether that is, I'm calling it a key operator or a master consultant group that might provide oversight, whether that's all the time oversight, whether that's a built-in program. There was a developer I was speaking to about creating an oversight framework, say, for all of their food tenants, because all of their food tenants were coming to them, guess what, for percentage rent only deals, where they're like, look, we're going to go out of business. We can afford to pay you whatever we can. We're going to do what we can. And he asked me, well, how do I know that they're getting the most out of their business? Great question, right? So he could go in there and say, well, they're running a bad operation. They're not really, doing well. It took me 20 minutes to get, a carry out order, all of those things. So he's like, well, I don't want to agree to a, percentage rent only deal without some kind of framework around it. So it caused me to think of a framework that can be put into for developers, a program that's specifically set up by restaurant folks who can say, okay, we need to, look at their analytics, kind of provide almost a franchise or level support to their tenants, and then give them a report saying, here's what these folks are doing, here's what we've agreed for them to do over the next quarter or whatever, and then constantly check in with them. And that even included culinary work, which, as you know, Justin, and both Herb, Chef Andrew, who I work with, to work with these folks on a continuing basis to make sure they're profitable, make sure their processes are good, and that they're considering food items that are working, that are relevant for now. One of the things that I mentioned earlier is part of this multi-unit concept needs to be examples of concepts that are do less better concepts that are set up to do off premise in a big way. And one of the ones I heard about recently that I thought I'd mention to you guys today, I heard a podcast with Charlie Parker talking about what they've done to their New York City restaurants, which I thought was genius. I'll send you guys the links and put it in. But he talked about what they did to Oriel, which they've done, which is, kind of a high-end bistro. And he did Oriel at home, and they're doing five apps, 5 entrees, and 5 desserts. And they're very much crafted for home delivery. And then they're doing kind of a white glove service where they're delivering it with their own team members, with instructions on how to heat it and all that. And I'd heard some other people do that. He was the first person I heard that kind of put it all together in a compact package. So it's like high-end food made to go, with the ability to give you instructions on how to do it. We'll deliver it to you in a way that he could do that in a ghost kitchen. He could open Oriel, DC, and in several different places around town. And I thought for sure he could, because it's kind of like bistro cooking at home. That's the kind of food you can't get right now, right? So anyway, I thought that was a great example of, maybe a more higher end thing that I think might surprise people. Along with, your burger and fry only, somebody who does it just extremely well, that's very specialty oriented in a couple of very, things, much like a great food hall has. And that's why I guess it's food hall-ish, in that you have, small concepts that are very detailed.
Andy, there's a place that I'm sure Herb is familiar with. It's about 2 blocks from where I live, and it's called American Beauty. And so it's the way they originally had it set up is they took over, I actually don't know what the original location was, but it's kind of at a corner off Rose Avenue, which is kind of one of the 2 main drags in Venice. And it was a higher end restaurant, higher end kind of new American restaurant that happened to have this window that served a $5 burger. In California, a $5 burger is not something that's really known outside of maybe an In-N-Out that's any good. And The window closed at like, I think 6 o'clock. I always hated that, like, I could never get there in time. And during the pandemic, they could not open their regular dining room, but they had this window, this burger window. And I have to tell you, I mean, there's been times where I've walked by there and there's 20, 30 people in line. I mean, you sit there and watched, the amount of business they're doing is extraordinary. So much so that they end up opening another location. So here's a higher end restaurant that now has this concept. I think it's called the Window at American Beauty, and it's caught fire. And all they do, I mean, I've heard you say this a lot of times, Andy, it's burgers, it's fries. I think they do a chicken sandwich and maybe a salad, and that's it. And it's literally 6 items on their menu. So that's like a perfect example of that. And one of the things that makes me think of is like, 10 years ago, the food truck is what birthed a lot of restaurants. I mean, there's quite a bit of restaurants that came from a food truck, and it was because it was something that it was an entry point for people. And one of the things I'm noticing, especially in LA, is because of social media, you have people that are basically cooking out of their house, getting a social media following, and having folks pick up food or delivering food, regulation or otherwise. And they're popular and they're emerging, and there's where a lot of the creativity is happening. And I'm convinced that the kind of place that we're talking about, Andy, this new version of a casual dining experience is probably going to be the format where a lot of those places go, outside of their home, because it not only will be a place where, they can continue to make money and do well, but if you have operational leadership where someone is actually showing you like how you can continue to develop your menu and optimize it to make a living and support you in how you build an off-premise program, that has real value for people like that. It's really valuable. So, and the last thing I'll say is, Andy, when we met at, one of the best restaurants I've ever been to in your town, in Mobile. And, my client in Atlanta is really good friends. They used to be in business together with that chef. I think their dining room is completely closed. And what you and I talked, and I said, hey, if this guy took this one item off their menu, I think it was like a chicken wing dish or something, and added a few sides and maybe have a sandwich, that would be a vendor at this concept that we wanted to do. And that's exactly what he's doing right now. He's making barbecue.
Yeah, and pizza, and amazing pizza.
James Beard nominated restaurant. So it's just, it's really interesting how things come full circle. And to your point, the simple things seem to be doing really, really well. Burgers, tacos, and burritos, or a number of things in that world.
To make sure it's clear what we're talking about, because sometimes I talk about concepts and people go, what the hell did you mean by that? And, I don't know that we've done a great job describing. Just to give people a physical representation, I've been using this example. Justin and I worked on one called The Yard, where I had a giant patio, and we put these kind of concepts that were grouped around it, and we put a drive-through around it, and places for delivery vehicles to park and all that, walk-up windows. So had those elements that you now see everybody adding. The walk-up window you just talked about, drive-through whenever possible. I think it depends on the location whether or not you can do that, obviously. Delivery from the get-go, however that's done. And there's a bunch of different arguments to how to do that, but you definitely have to have the ability to do it and to execute it quickly. And when you're talking about multiple concepts, that becomes very challenging to make sure that food can be done quickly and grouped together. Which the other aspect of this particular idea is that it has to be integrated. The technology, much like we were talking about the weakness of a food hall, the entire technology package has to be one. So it has to be one from all aspects, from payments to, everything's got to be one to make that tech work and to make it a seamless environment. The other thing that, as we're talking about that delivery thing, the thing that drives everyone to a third-party delivery is the marketplace that they have that you don't have as an independent operator. So a small multi-unit, however, that has just say we have these 4 or 5, say it's just 4 with all these attributes on it, it becomes a marketplace of its own. So right now, as an example, someone said, well, geez, that's not going to be on my radar if it's not on the delivery app that they use. So if it's not on, Uber Eats or whatever, they're not going there. Right. And however, so the problem has been, and the argument from a lot of operators is, I've got to be on that digital marketplace. So how do I convert guests to use me instead of going through the digital marketplace, which is the second problem. So the other positive about this concept of grouping individuals together is that they have enough synergy to have their own marketplace all of a sudden. Right. If I've got 4 or 5 really good offerings with an integrated technology solution, then I'm my own marketplace at that point. So the less competing with the third party deliveries is a big plus. I think in that aspect.
To tie a few of those threads together, and I hope I'm on script, Andy, but you're talking about doing something well and doing it really well and sticking to that. I mean, it's amazed me over the years how menus have grown. And the reality is, quick analytics can show you that, 20% of those items are really what's making you the money, so why are we doing the rest of the things? So stick to something, do it really well. The last 9 months has accelerated a lot of these things that have needed to happen anyway. And we've talked about that 1,000 times. So yes, do something really well, and get good and scale at it. And then if you can put a collaboration of those different things together, I think what you were just talking about, building your own marketplace. So you have a great taqueria, you've got a great pizzeria, you got a great, coffee shop, whatever it might be. So now you're building, everything together, but everybody's really best in class at that one individual item. And then you've created, a synergy. You've created a destination. You've created an experience out of that, whether it be the drive-through or the walk-up where somebody wants to sit there and eat. And the other thing you want to tag onto that is where the buying power is going today. And an idea I want to get in there in your heads is, I'm not the buying power anymore. I'm just not. It's people younger than me. It's my kids. And there is a statistic that says 67% of those people, more than a third of those people, don't know what they're going to eat for dinner before 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And that's a reality. That's just a stat. So you think about it, there's options, and a lot of those people are not making for themselves, especially in this environment too. So if you're creating that marketplace and you're creating a way that, the girlfriend can get the pasta and the other girlfriend can get, whatever else, and it's in best in class and in an area to get it together, then I think you've created a great marketplace, and you're playing into the buying power that's coming along. Because it's not me who's going to eat meatloaf every Thursday evening. It's just
right.
Dumb, by the way. But
I am what you call a old millennial. I'm at the top end of the millennial spectrum. And when you said that, I thought I didn't know what I was going to eat before 3 o'clock yesterday.
Yeah.
And that's kind of, and honestly, at 3 o'clock yesterday, I was listening to the last talk you guys had with the what was his name, Andy?
Are you talking about Will Donaldson?
That was, yeah, and he operates food halls in Southwest, or not Southwest,
Southeast. Got a company called Politan.
Yeah, and when he talked about that subscription service, I got so excited, and I sent it to my girlfriend, and I was just like, "Oh, this is so cool!" And for me, the reason why is there's a number of subscription services that are coming online. There's been plenty that have do it yourself, but to say that you have the option of kind of going to what you were just talking about, Herb, like there's 4 places, they're all best in class, and they provide some kind of custom meal service on a weekly basis. I mean, if that food hall was a little bit too far for me to drive to, I'd subscribe to it if it had the right places. So that kind of, and to me, again, that was because of his creativity and him advocating on behalf of his tenants and his restaurateurs, but it's so important. And one of the things I was going to say, one of the things that got me really excited, and I think Andy as well, about our project is we had this captive, and we'll still have a captive audience. I mean, we had 10,000 people, Herb, just to give you full context. They only got 30 minutes for lunch, so they could not leave. This is a company that like operates very high on analytics, so they know when their folks move. Like they're there for the time they're there. They get the best out of them. They take care of them, and they leave. And so they can either go to the cafeteria or bring their own lunch, but they don't have a lot of flexibility. And one of the things that Andy and I kept talking about is obviously as you have teams, they'll want catered lunches. And I mean, you literally have a catering program that simply serves just that campus, and that's a profitable business. But also considering something like having, reoccurring in a variety of meals from that person's favorite place, or it rotates week by week. Those things are of value. And when you have a captive audience, what it allows you to do with those analytics that Andy was talking about is actually start to figure out what people want and fine tune things. And I think the value proposition for a restaurateur is going to be, hey, if I can go out to Mission Viejo with these 2,000 homes and learn what these people like and what's going to have them keep coming back, then I feel comfortable opening a restaurant in maybe a more mixed environment where I'm not anchored by just housing, or I'm not the only game in town, because I've actually learned how this works. So I just want to underline the fact that how valuable that is, how valuable it's going to become for people that are anchored in these more housing oriented developments, where you just have a concentration of people that's not going to change regardless of what may come up, and learning from being in that environment and having an operator that kind of works with you to make the best out of that environment.
Absolutely.
I think that's probably a good thought to close on is that, this is a concept that can work in a lot of locations. The thought process behind it takes into account a number of the things that we've all learned over the years, as well as our food hall experience, and then multi-concept experience, fast casual experience. I'm gonna give you guys excuse me, one more story that I was working with a client this morning on, a fast casual client that I'm working with on a prototype. And we were talking about how much sales their off-premise is doing. We're working on kind of a layout for their new thing. And I had presented them with a couple of options. One of them was this, a small fast casual space. And we literally took almost a third of it and devoted it to off-premise, instead of, kind of the common thinking, which is, hey, we're going to put more of an effort and put 20% or 10% of our space at the front door and create a good pickup. I started to really think about that when we started to look at what are their long-term, what are they doing now? And then what are long-term off-premise sales going to look like? Why aren't we designing toward what our goal is, where we are now, first of all, and then putting that emphasis there? And when I did that, it really changed the way I thought about how to lay the space out. You'll appreciate this, Herb, because we're so used to looking at a plan and thinking about how it works inside the building. When I really started to think about, okay, if 40% of this is going to be out the door, I need to make sure that 40% of it works for out the door. So I had originally, as an example, we had kind of a cool little setup for pickup at the front and all that. So I made that twice as big as it was. And all of a sudden we were looking at it like, wow, this actually is pretty exciting. We created ins and outs for walk-ups and drivers and all this stuff. We're like, this really works. And we've got enough, we still had enough to do the inside business that we had intended. So it got me thinking about that. And to wrap this all, kind of tie this all up, we're here to talk with anybody if they've got ideas about it. While this video platform isn't about sales per se, or trying to get folks to talk with us, we're trying to talk about what concepts that we're working on. If you've got properties and you're trying to figure out how to do that, we're ready with some ideas to help you do that. Herb and I work together. Justin and I work together. We've got Chef Andrew, who couldn't be on today as well, working on a number of these kind of very forward-thinking projects. We're doing two of them. I'm working on two of them that are much like the yard concept, that are developing it further. And I'm certainly hoping to get back into some bigger food halls when that starts to happen, and apply all of these forward-thinking ideas. So So that's what I'm doing today, and I can't wait for Christmas to happen and to be sitting at home for a couple of days and let the world go by.
I hear you, and I agree. Thanks for the opportunity, Andy. Always a pleasure to.
Hey,
Yeah.
thanks for being here, Justin. Good to see you as well, and we will have you
Absolutely.
both back on again. So enjoy your weekend, and we'll see y'all real soon.